Do the Dallas Cowboys have to trade back from pick number 24? All that and more in this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast.
You are Locked On Cowboys, your
Locked
daily Dallas Cowboys podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Locked on Cowboys.
Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. We'd like to thank you for making us your first listen of the day. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Make every moment more. Right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get started. I am your host, Marcus Mosher. You can follow me on Twitter at Marcus_Mosher. Joining me today, as always, is Landon McCool. You can check him out on Twitter at McCoolBCB. On today's show, we are answering your Twitter questions, including could the Dallas Cowboys select a defensive tackle in round one? Who is their top free agent priority? But let's start with this, Landon. Do the Cowboys, this question comes from Mark, do the Cowboys have to consider trading back in round one, given their lack of picks and because of the depth in this draft?
I don't know if they have to consider it. They definitely should consider it. I mean, like you mentioned, they're short picks this year. Obviously, they're a huge draft and develop team. So being short pick is not a great spot to be in, especially when you have a number of free agents coming up in the next few years because of the enormous draft haul that you had almost 4 years ago today. And so I think that if an opportunity comes up and you feel comfy with where the move back is to, and you're getting some good compensation, that you definitely should consider it, maybe more so than you would in a normal year. But I don't know that like you absolutely have to. I mean, I think that there are definitely guys that are could fall to you at your pick that you would be surprised to be falling to you, right? Like some surprise fallers, and you're in you're in like in that range in the first round where all it takes is one. All it takes is one guy to kind of slip through the cracks a little bit, and suddenly you've got a top five, in this class, top five offensive tackle falling to you, or like Brian Thomas Jr. or someone like that, who's just kind of has a lot of players at the same position that are ahead of him that are also extremely good players. And then suddenly you get a guy that in probably any other year would be a top 15 pick, staring you at the face at 24. And look, there's an opportunity that guy could be a quarterback, right? And maybe you get a nice trade offer to trade back in order to facilitate a trade for a team that's coming up to get their quarterback, and they want that extra fifth year. There certainly is opportunity, I think, for trade backs, and I certainly think it is more appetizing. But it's also one of the things you definitely need to wait and see the way the draft board falls, because you could have a CD Lamb or a Des Bryant situation where you have a guy that you never even expected to fall all the way down to you land right in your lap, and you don't want to like just lose that opportunity by trying to trade down or trade back before you get a chance to see what happens.
I agree with every point that you just made. However, when you look at this team right now and what it could look like in 2025, I mean, you could be missing a big chunk of the middle of your roster. Like I was just going through some of the players today. Like I think Dorrance Armstrong is going to leave in free agency. That's a starting defensive end basically for you, right? Osa Dikizuwa is a free agent next year. Leighton Vander Esch, I'm not going to break any news, but I don't think he's coming back, right? Jordan Lewis is a free agent. Stephon Gilmore is a free agent. Your safeties are all free agents after the 2024 season. I just wonder, like, players from like 22 to 35, I think you've got to start rebuilding that part of your roster. And Landon, every time I do a mock draft, I end up loving the players that are available from like picks 50 through 80. And I always wish the Cowboys had another pick there. And I think this is a draft where you could drop from 24 to 30, pick up another third round pick and be thrilled and get the same caliber player at 30 that you are at 24.
Yeah, it certainly is possible. And like I said, I am endorsing 95% of all trade back scenarios. I just think that they need to be, they're at that pick. They're right in that range, right? Where they're at 24 and there's probably 23 blue chip
Yeah,
players,
there
right?
there
Or
you could very well get a first round graded player that falls to you. But
which you normally wouldn't. Yeah.
is it worth moving down away from that player if it's close at all?
I
I
think it
actually
depends on the player, right?
yeah, it
I think
depends on the
that's the
player.
thing, right? Like I think if it's a player at a position that you already are committed in, a pretty long term contract to players, and there's not like a clear path to getting them on the field, or even if it's a situation where like even with tackle, right? Like if you've got Tyron Smith coming back and Tyler Smith coming back, it's like if you get like a blue chip tackle staring at you at the face, someone may be willing to overpay for that
Oh my
guy,
gosh, yeah.
right? And your need there may not be as immediate as uh as getting that extra third round pick this year, right? So I do think that there are lots of these kind of case by case situations that like could come up. But I don't know that I'm disagreeing with you. I tend to think that I think trading back is a top choice in what can happen on draft day, but it also matters very much what the actual specifics are.
I just want to mention I've been doing these mock drafts all the time on Pro
Yeah.
Football Focus, and just to let everybody know, the Cowboys don't have a fourth round pick. I'm not sure
Yep.
why PFF hasn't updated that in their simulator. So every time I do one of these drafts, and I just do the first 3 rounds because the Cowboys don't have a fourth round pick. Like I did one today. I took an offensive lineman, a cornerback, and then a running back. And it's like, okay, where's your linebacker? What linebacker? What are the Cowboys doing at linebacker this year? Or what are they doing at defensive end? What are they doing at defensive tackle? It's just like I don't have enough picks to fill all of those needs. And you're not going to have enough picks to fill every need. That's just the way that the NFL and the draft goes. But I think I would feel a lot better about not trading back if the Cowboys had their fourth round pick. I feel like
Yeah.
not having that pick does make a trade back a little bit more appealing.
Sure. Unless you've got the other chance here is there a player that you're willing to move on from to kind of get picks instead? Because I do think that there is, and I don't have anyone in mind,
I
but
say
I'm
that's
just
the
saying.
problem is like I don't know which player you could trade where you're getting a top 125 pick.
That's a different story. Maybe you don't get like a top 4 round player or a top, 3 round player. But I do think that if you wanted to move off on some of the players that may not be a good fit necessarily, you have a lot of safeties here. Maybe you can move off of one of them and get like a 5th rounder or something like
Sure.
that. I think that helps kind of, mitigate some of those losses that you had. And look, I mean, I do think too that it's something to consider that even with all the holes that the Cowboys would have had, if they hadn't done that trade, they might have taken a quarterback anyways in
Yeah,
4th round,
I think it filled one
So
of their it filled one of the needs. Like they needed to get younger and they've been wanting to get a developmental quarterback anyway. So I'm not saying that the trade was bad.
no, yeah, but it's just tough when you have a whole bunch of needs and you're looking at not enough
Well,
picks for sure.
I'm going to give you one of the problems that I have. This wide receiver class is awesome, man. Like
Yeah.
I know that we're just starting to get into it, and we're going to be talking more about the draft over the next 2 months. But like day 2 is where the wide receiver
Yeah.
class is really strong. It's also a good spot to grab a running back. Like if you need to
Yeah.
grab a running back, which the Cowboys clearly do, if you want to grab one in round 3, you're going to get a heck of a player. It's really hard to go running back, wide receiver on day 2. And then you're basically just completely ignoring your defense or your offensive line. That's the issue that I'm running into when I do these drafts.
Yeah, I mean, especially since I mean, let's go ahead and assume you're going to need a starting center at some point, right?
Yeah.
So, like, I think, yeah, getting a starting center, picking the wide receiver that you want because you feel like he's going to add to the team, and then you're going to need a starting running back potentially as well. And that's not even addressing linebacker, which you probably
Corner.
want.
I mean, you can
Corner, which
either
you
call it
probably
corner. Yep.
so yeah, I agree that there's definitely needs here. I think the Cowboys are going to have to pull from free agency more than they're used to, just because of this. I mean, I just don't know that you
I
can
agree.
rely on the idea that you're going to be able to trade back. If it comes up, that's great, but I think the Cowboys are likely going to have to pull some of these replacements from free agency or potentially talk about re-signing some folks like Dorrance Armstrong, or
which is going to be tough to do considering their cap situation, which the Cowboys got to figure out here over the next few weeks. Let's continue to talk about the draft. Is there any chance that the Cowboys could draft a defensive tackle in round one for the second straight year? We will get to that next. This episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Get buckets with your first bet on FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook, because right now, new customers can get $150 in bonus bets with any winning $5 bet. That is $150 if your bet wins. Bet on all of your favorite NBA players and teams with quick bets, live same-game parlays, exclusive props, and so much more. We only have about 2 months until the NBA playoffs. You can bet on who's going to be in the play-in game, who's going to make the NBA playoffs, who's going to come out of each conference, and of course, who is going to win the championship. Just visit FanDuel.com/lockedon and shoot your shot with FanDuel, the official sportsbook partner of the NBA. Welcome back to this episode of the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We want to let you know that Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. And now it's also available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every league. Find Locked On Sports Today now available on the free Fire TV channels app. All right, Landon, next question comes from Adam. He wants to know, is there any chance that the Cowboys draft an interior defensive lineman with a 24th pick?
Well, the question is not only coming from Adam, the question is also coming from me, because I have this question, right? Like, to me, it makes a lot of sense, right, for the Cowboys to be interested in a defensive tackle, even in the first round, even after taking a defensive tackle last year in the first round. You talk about, just because that's how much of a cratering hole that defensive tackle has been on this team for the last few years, is that you drafted a guy in the first round last year, and you're still like, you're losing him faster than you're getting him. You know, you're going to have Osa coming up on a contract at the end of this year.
Yep.
He is going to probably command a lot of money. He played very, very well for you. And if you look at kind of the pass rush statistics and just the statistics overall, he's produced at a very high rate for defensive tackles. And if you're not interested in necessarily paying Osa, then you're definitely going to need another defensive tackle. So even without the Osa walking at the end of the year, you lost Neville Gallimore. Hankins is not necessarily guaranteed to be back. And
no, even if he's what, 37 years old now?
Even if he's 37. You've got some guys that are younger, but I mean, mostly they're kind of inside outside guys. They're not really a bunch of true defensive tackles that you've got.
Are you thinking about like Chauncey Golston?
Yeah, Golston and Fajoku, and
Golston's on the final year of his deal as well.
Also, yeah. So this is a situation where the Cowboys have a ton of need here. Look, on one side, you've got the Cowboys draft history and tendencies, right? Which weighs heavily against them drafting a defensive tackle in the first round. But on the other side, you've got all this other stuff, including like what I just mentioned, the needs, the lack of talent there that's coming down the road. And I would say the other part that's kind of weighing on this side is that there's the presence of guys like Byron Murphy, who at the bottom of the first round makes a ton of sense. He's the kind of guy that, like, you spend a first round pick as a defensive tackle. He's disruptive in both the pass and the run game. He's an incredible athlete. He dominated at Texas. And I think that and then even his teammate, maybe even a round later, he's a guy Devontae Sweat. So I think that there is a lot of history telling us, hey, we were lucky to get a first round defensive tackle drafted last year. But I think there's also a lot of evidence on the other side that makes me really say the Cowboys really, really should consider taking a defensive tackle in the first round if there's one worthy of that pick that falls to them.
I will say across the NFL, you're seeing this happen more often, where these teams, they just can't keep up with the defensive tackle talent. Like, look at the 49ers, right? They drafted DeForest Buckner. He got to be where he was so much money that they couldn't keep him. They drafted Eric Armstead, same school. Then they go out and they pay Jayon Hargrave. They draft Javon Kinlaw in round 1, and they still have defensive tackle problems. Like they're still looking. Philadelphia is another good example. They've drafted defensive tackles in back-to-back years, right? And yet Fletcher Cox is the defensive tackle that keeps playing the most. Milton Williams was somebody they took in the second round, having a hard time even getting him on the field. So this is an issue that a lot of really good teams are having, is they just can't get enough quality defensive tackles. You mentioned Murphy. I think that's a really good one. I've got a feeling that once we get through the combine, he's probably not going to be an option. Yeah,
maybe.
But Johnny Newton from Illinois, I know that's somebody who a lot of people like quite a bit. And I'm even going to throw in another name, Darius Robinson from Missouri. I know he's really more of a edge, but he's a 290-pound edge with really long arms. Could he do some of the inside outside stuff to kind of moonlight as a defensive tackle on certain situations? It's possible. I do wonder, like, if you're not drafting these guys high, it's pretty unlikely that you're going to find somebody later on in the draft that you feel great about playing.
Yeah, and then again, it kind of feeds into that other problem we talked about, is that if you take a defensive tackle in the first round, it really makes it hard to kind of hit all the other needs that you've got. So,
but if you pass on them, I mean,
you're in trouble too.
Especially this class, like there's one or two guys outside of round 1 that I think could make an impact by year 2. Not in year 1, because most of these guys don't make an impact in year 1. I'm talking about like year 2 and year 3.
You're running a real gambit, right? Like I do think that like second, third, and fourth, you can find a wide receiver, running back, and center in those rounds. It's tight, man. You're running a tightrope, you know? So I think that that's kind of where I'm at too, though, is that to me, you know, there are certain players, certain positions, right? That like, if you can't get a guy at that position in a top, you know, into the round, then is it worth it kind of tossing a pick at a guy who may not be ready for 2 or 3 years?
And I even look at Dallas's draft history. Now, this isn't to say that it's always going to be the same, but they drafted Neville Gallimore in the 3rd round, right? I don't know if he's lived up to that status, right? They drafted Tristan Hill in the 2nd round. That obviously didn't work out. Osa did. Osa is one of the rare hits that you get on day 2. It's really hard to find those guys, because typically defensive tackles that you're drafting on day 2, either they're undersized like Osa, or they're great athletes like Tristan Hill and Neville Gallimore that just haven't put it all together yet. It's a real risk. It's one of the few positions that I just don't feel great about year to year drafting on day 2 and day 3 and expecting anything from.
It's one of those positions that like there's a very clear gap between the top guys and like that second level almost every year, right?
Every year.
Like, and because they're such rare planet players, right?
Yes.
Because you have bigger guys that are also athletic, right? That are offensive linemen. Those guys are rare, but these guys are just very unusual body types, right? Like the types of human beings that can pack 300 pounds onto a 6'2" frame and still move fluidly, like they're, you know, a soccer player. So I think that there is a point when in the first round where you can get those guys and they're physically gifted and they're skilled players, right? If you go past the first round, you start usually getting one or the other, right? Like skilled players or physically gifted players. You just don't get the guys that are like plug and play starter defensive tackles in the 2nd round the way you would at, you know, 95% of the other positions in the NFL.
And by the way, this isn't me advocating that the Cowboys have to draft a defensive tackle in round 1. It's more just stating the reality. Like if the Cowboys don't draft one in round 1, I wouldn't be surprised if they just completely ignored it until the 5th and 6th round. And at that point, you're just grabbing a body to fill the back end of the roster.
Yeah, it's not like, oh, we need a defensive tackle or bust. It's like, hey, a first round defensive tackle is a need on this team. You need a top end interior pass rusher. Don't try to like, you know, ham fist it with a 3rd rounder. Like that's just not going to work. No. But if the talent falls to you, then you have to take advantage of that opportunity, because the Cowboys haven't in the past, and you know, the roster reflects that.
All right, Landon, you mentioned that the Cowboys might need to do a better job of re-signing some of their own free agents this year. Who is the top free agent priority for the Cowboys outside of Tyron Smith? We will get to that next. Welcome back to the Locked On Cowboys podcast. We are answering your mailbag questions here on the show. Our last question comes from Dallas Griffin. He wants to know, if you can only re-sign only one of these, who would you choose? Dorrance Armstrong, Stephon Gilmore, Jonathan Hankins, or Tyler Biotish? So you sign one, and all the other ones hit free agency.
So Armstrong, who was the second one?
Gilmore,
Yeah,
Hankins,
or
Biotish.
Okay, I just want to make sure that my guy was in there. I think the answer to me is Stephon Gilmore, because if you go around and look, honestly, and it's funny. You know what actually gave me this answer is I saw Mina Kimes tweeting last night about how she was going, doing a project for NFL, her NFL show on ESPN, and she was going around just looking at all the depth charts, and the thing that she kept on coming back to was, this team needs cornerbacks. This team needs cornerbacks.
Every team needs at least one or two.
Yeah. And if you look at the Cowboys, right, if they let Stephon Gilmore go, right, if they let him walk, I mean, you got to draft a cornerback, like probably immediately. I think that you could say that
unless you bring back Jordan Lewis, that makes things a little bit different, right? Because if you bring back Jordan Lewis, he's your slot. Bland and Diggs are your outside corners, and maybe you could wait until rounds 2 or 3 to grab one.
I just don't know that you can rely on that. I just, not at this position. I mean, again, to me, even if you want to bring Jordan Lewis back, I think that's like as a bonus, right? Like, and I don't know. I think you need that third corner, and so especially when you're looking at that grouping of players, like Hankins, literally you're signing him because, I don't know, like you don't have very many other 330-pound defensive tackles on speed dial. It's not like Hankins has been spectacular,
To me, he's somebody that signs for the vet minimum, and
yeah,
I almost don't throw him in there because he's not going to cost anything.
He's probably not going to cost you anything. I think Biotish, it's time for an upgrade here. Like, he's been fine for several years, but I think because of what you've seen in the draft, it makes sense to replace Biotish in the draft because of the depth, the rare depth in this class, right? And to me, it's just Gilmore. Armstrong is going to cost more than you're probably willing to pay. Armstrong would probably be my second choice. I mean, just because I think as far as total value for the team, like he's probably the next guy, right?
And he's 26.
He's 26. He's young. He's good on defense. He's great on special teams. It makes a lot of sense, but he's also probably about to get paid more money than his worth, if that makes sense.
Yeah, because I don't know if you can pay a third defensive end $11 million a year here,
which is probably what he's going to get, right? So, and you also have someone like Sam Williams, who, I think it's going to be interesting to see how the Sam Williams.
It's time. They need him.
But it's time. You're right. And I think you've seen enough from him that you can hope that they can corral that, because it's not hope. Like, that he's a talented guy. It's just not consistency with that guy. Right. So, and that's why, to me, it seems like Gilmore is the guy, just because I think it smooths the transition. Here's the other thing too. It gives you another top end guy at the corner position in case you need to kind of slow roll Diggs into this situation. Yeah. So I just think it provides a lot more stability at a position that most teams in the NFL don't have stability. And I also think that it creates a situation that, especially if you sign Jordan Lewis as well, you have incredible depth at a position that almost no one in the NFL does have depth at.
Yeah.
And he got robbed of that opportunity this year because of Diggs. And now I think it'd be great to kind of roll that back with that chance of having those top 4 guys as your cornerback crew.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's Gilmore for me. 2 things that I want to mention before we head out. Number 1, did you see the videos of Stephon Gilmore yesterday throwing the football?
Throwing the football? Yeah.
I didn't know that he could throw the ball like that. He apparently threw several passes for South Carolina, which is really cool.
He sent that to Mike McCarthy directly. So that.
Second thing, and I'm sure this doesn't factor into the Cowboys' decision here at all, but if you're like galaxy braining this a little bit, if the Cowboys let Stephon Gilmore leave in free agency, they would not get a comp pick back because he's been in the league for so long. Whereas Tyler Biadasz and Dorrance Armstrong, I think both are going to get around $10 million a year. And for a team that desperately needs more picks, let's say both of those guys equate to 2 fifth-round picks in 2025. I think you're going to need those picks. So it probably does make sense to let those guys walk and bring back the veterans that aren't going to really cost you much.
And if you remember, that's how the Cowboys got those players that we're having to replace in 2025 is through comp picks. We got a ton of extra comp picks that year and allowed us to have a whole bunch of draft picks in that year that we had, 10 picks or something like that. So, so that it makes sense that you would refill those coffers with more comp picks.
Yeah. All right, that is it for today's show. We want to thank you for making Locked On Cowboys your first listen every single day. On tomorrow's show, we're going to talk about the tight end position, talk about Jake Ferguson's breakout season, what to expect from Luke Schoonmaker in year 2. Also wanted to let you know that Landon and I are going to start some of our draft coverage. I know we've been a little bit later getting to some draft prospects. That's going to change here in the next couple of weeks. The combine, the NFL combine starts next Thursday. We will get you up to speed for the NFL draft. So make sure that you are tuning in for that. Make sure that you're downloading the podcast wherever you get your podcasts. We are free and available on all platforms. Go check out Landon on Twitter at McCoolBCB. I'm at Marcus_Mosier, and we will see you right back here tomorrow.